Some journeys begin with pain and humiliation, but end in glorious victory. This is the story of a Black woman CEO who was once rejected, dismissed, and mocked by powerful investors in the boardroom. Yet instead of breaking down, she swallowed her tears and turned humiliation into fire. Starting from nothing, walking in the shadows with empty hands, she built her own empire step by step through unshakable will and burning ambition. And then, in a twist no one saw coming, the very investors who had once turned her away came begging, pleading for her to buy their failing company. Across 8 chapters, you will witness every step of her journey, from her first humiliation to the sleepless nights of building a startup, to the heights of power and the sweetest revenge of all. This is not just a story about money. It's a testament to faith, willpower, and the resilience of a woman who dared to challenge every barrier. Make sure to subscribe so you won't miss a single twist, because what you're about to see will surprise you, move you, and keep you hooked until the very end. The boardroom sat high above the city, glass walls opening to a skyline shimmering in the midday sun. The air carried the scent of polished wood and leather chairs, a cold, calculated atmosphere of power. Around the long mahogany table, men in glossy suits adjusted their Rolex watches, their briefcases at their sides, trading glances as if sharing a private joke. And then the door opened. She, a young Black woman CEO, walked in. Her suit was modest, without designer bags, without diamonds, only carrying a stack of documents she had spent months perfecting. The sharp click of her heels echoed against the wooden floor, each step a reminder that she was walking onto a stage where no one expected, nor wanted, her presence. A few investors lifted their heads, then quickly exchanged smirks. One arched his lips into a half-smile, the kind laced with quiet mockery. Another dreamer, and this time a Black woman. Let's see what circus she puts on. She inhaled deeply. Her heart pounded so fiercely she feared they might hear it. Yet she smiled. It wasn't fake. It was the kind of smile forged by countless nights rehearsing in front of the mirror, until it became armor. She took the seat at the end of the table, placing her documents carefully on the polished wood, as though laying her dreams before their cold, judging eyes. Just as she prepared to speak, a man with silver hair cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he drawled with casual authority. "Do you realize this is a $1 million investment meeting? Or did you think you wandered into a college debate class?" The room chuckled. Not loud laughter, just the restrained kind, mixed with the clink of coffee cups and the shuffle of papers. The laughter wasn't aimed at her idea. It was aimed at her. For a second, she thought of walking out. But instead, she smiled again, locked eyes with him, and replied, "Yes, I know this is where millions are decided. That's exactly why I'm here, and not wasting time in any ordinary classroom." Her words silenced the room for a few seconds. Perhaps they hadn't expected a young woman to snap back with such calm defiance. But the silence didn't last. Another investor leaned back in his chair, smirking. "You've got nerve." "All right then, let's hear this grand plan of yours." Their eyes said it all. "You're nothing more than today's afternoon entertainment." But she knew this moment would carve the first mark of her journey. And she whispered to herself, "Laugh now, because one day I'll make you laugh through your tears." She stood, adjusted the mic, and began her pitch. Her voice was steady, clear. Every number, every chart lit up the screen. She spoke of vision, of untapped markets, of the gaps only she had seen. She told them about her first customers, the hopeful feedback, the proof that her idea had life. But from the start, she could feel the frost in the room. Some investors didn't even glance at the slides. They were too busy tapping on their phones. One stifled a yawn, half covering his mouth, not even trying to hide his boredom. Then came the chuckle, sharp and cruel, from the right side of the table. A middle-aged man with a soft belly leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, lips curled. "You really think this product will change the market? Cute, naive, but this market doesn't need a little startup girl to keep us entertained." The room broke into soft laughter. Some even patted each other's shoulders, as if they had just heard a clever joke. Her fists tightened, nails digging into her palms. But she refused to tremble. She inhaled deeply and pressed on. As I just outlined, capturing even 5% of the market would generate revenues of, come on, Another voice cut in. This time it was a younger investor, slick hair, smirk plastered on his face. Sounds nice, but do you really think you have the ability to lead this? Have you ever managed anything bigger than a corner store? Laughter again. Shrugs. A swirl of wine in a glass. Arrogance thick in the air. Her throat burned dry, but she kept her voice calm. Leadership doesn't start with power. It starts with the vision to see a future others ignore. I see it, and I will prove it. This time, no laughter, only silence. But it wasn't respect. It was the kind of silence that said, not worth arguing with. When her presentation ended, she expected at least one question, a flicker of interest. Instead, she got a chorus of shaking heads. The silver-haired investor leaned back, waved his hand dismissively. No, we're not investing. This market doesn't need you. And frankly, you don't belong here. The words landed like a sentence. Short, cold, crushing. In her mind, everything went silent. Only one phrase echoed, you don't belong here. The boardroom door shut behind her with a cold click, echoing like the gavel of a judge delivering a sentence. The hallway was carpeted thick, but every step felt heavy. Each strike of her heels rang in her head, repeating the words, you don't belong here. She walked faster, faster still, as if trying to outrun the sneers that clung to the back of her neck. When the elevator doors closed, she finally let her burning eyes give way to tears. One drop, then another, sliding down her cheeks. She wiped them away quickly, terrified the receptionist or anyone might see. CEOs weren't supposed to cry, especially not a black woman CEO in a world already stacked with prejudice. But the truth was, her heart had been ripped apart. They hadn't just rejected her idea, they had rejected her. They laughed at her dream, her skin, her gender. Worst of all, they dismissed her so thoroughly they hadn't even cared to give her plan a fair look. The elevator doors opened to the ground floor, and daylight spilled in, blinding her for a moment. She stepped out into the rush of the city, swallowing back the sobs clawing at her throat. Someone bumped her shoulder, hurrying past, briefcase in hand. No one cared. To the world, she was just another woman leaving a meeting gone wrong. But to her, this was the kind of failure that could change a life forever. As she passed the towering building, she glanced up at the gleaming logo carved into marble. The name of the investment firm seared itself into her memory. She paused, lifted her chin and whispered to herself, "You've planted humiliation in me. I'll feed it, and one day it'll grow into the power that makes you regret this moment." Then she walked on, tears still wet on her face. But in her eyes flickered something new, not pain anymore, but resolve. That night, her tiny rented room was so quiet she could hear the clock ticking. On the desk lay the stack of documents thrown back at her, edges crumpled, smudged with the fingerprints of those who had rejected her. Beside it sat her old laptop, its dim glow reflecting a face drained with exhaustion, but eyes burning with fire. She sat there for hours, letting tears fall onto the papers, smearing the ink. Every so often, their mocking voices echoed in her mind, sharp as knives. "You don't belong here." She bit her lip until it bled, then suddenly grabbed a pen, flipping open a worn notebook. Her hand trembled at first, but each stroke grew bolder as she wrote, "One day I will return, and when I do, you will kneel, begging me to buy what you are about to lose." She underlined the words, pressing hard. They etched into the page like a seal in blood. Not just a promise, a vow. Outside the window, the city lights still glowed. People were dining, laughing, signing million-dollar deals. But she, alone with her pain, was signing a different contract, one with herself. That night, she did not sleep. She sat staring at the distant lights, smiling through tears. A bitter smile, yes, but one carrying a new strength. From that moment, humiliation was no longer a burden. It had become fuel, the engine that would drive her forward no matter the cost. After that fateful night, her life turned a new page. But instead of golden doors opening, it led her down the dark alleys of harsh reality. Starting a business wasn't glory. It was blood, sweat, and sometimes bitter, salty tears. With what little savings she had left, she rented a tiny room so small she could almost touch both walls at once. It was her office, her warehouse, and her bedroom, where she slept on an old couch. A second-hand wooden desk, a few plastic chairs, and her battered laptop became the headquarters of her company. Her staff, just two brave souls willing to gamble with her. A young programmer who had quit out of frustration, and a marketing girl fired for daring to argue with her old boss. 3 people, 3 plastic chairs, and a dream that seemed impossible. In those early days, they worked while slurping instant noodles, occasionally splurging on cheap buy-one-get-one pizza. Every time the Wi-Fi cut out, they just laughed it off. Hey, it's a startup. Who needs luxury? But behind the laughter was silent worry. Rent, electricity, even the smallest bills could break them. Their first customer didn't come from flashy ads, but from her knocking on doors, pitching to small shop owners. Most waved her off. Some snapped, "You're wasting my time." But one afternoon, a shopkeeper smiled and said, "All right, I'll give your product a try. Not because I believe in it, but because I see in your eyes you're not someone who gives up." That single line was like fresh water in the desert. It was just a small deal, but it lit a spark in her and her team. They could do this. That night, the 3 of them cracked open soda cans instead of champagne, clinking them together in their cramped little office. She lifted her can, looked at her partners, and declared, "This may not be a perfect beginning, but it's our beginning, and one day the world will know our company's name." In that moment, the mocking laughter from the investors began to fade. Another sound replaced it. Belief. After the tiny joy of their first customer, reality came crashing down like cold rain. That first contract was nothing more than a candle flickering in a storm. In the days that followed, they knocked on door after door, made call after call, only to be met with rejection. "Sorry, we're not interested. This idea sounds familiar, but not practical." "You really think a tiny company like yours can compete with the giants?" Each rejection landed like a stone hurled straight at her heart. Sometimes she would leave a shop, stand on the sidewalk, the wind whipping her hair, tears threatening to fall, but she swallowed them back, terrified her team might see her weakness. Inside their cramped office, gloomy days stretched on. Computers crashed constantly, prototypes failed during demos. One night they stayed awake till dawn preparing for a big meeting, only for the client to cancel that morning without notice. Instant noodle cups piled up on the desk beside unpaid bills. Their savings drained until they were forced to debate whether to downgrade their internet plan or cut it entirely to save costs. One evening, the room was so silent it was painful. The young programmer had dozed off at the desk, head resting against the keyboard, while the marketing girl quietly wiped away tears behind her laptop screen. Her chest tightened. They had trusted her, followed her, and so far, she had only delivered disappointment. A haunting question echoed in her mind. Maybe they were right. Maybe I really don't belong here. But then, in that heavy silence, she stood up and slammed her hand on the table. "Listen, I don't care how much they laugh at us. We started this, which means we keep going. If we fall today, we get up tomorrow. And as long as I'm breathing, this company will not die." Her words didn't erase the fear, but they lit a small flame, warming the cold room. Her 2 partners lifted their heads, eyes red but determined. They knew the road was paved with stones, but at least they weren't walking it alone. One gloomy morning, while the team sat in their tiny office sipping cold coffee, the phone suddenly rang. An unknown number flashed on the screen. She hesitated, half expecting, another debt collector? But instead, a man's voice said, "Hello, I own a small chain of convenience stores in the suburbs. I came across your product in a friend's shop. I'd like to know more. Can you come meet me?" The team stared at each other in shock. No one even dared to breathe. She quickly nodded, though the caller couldn't see her. "Of course. I'll be there right away. Thank you for giving me this chance." That afternoon, she took the bus all the way to the suburbs, clutching her worn folder. The rain drizzled, soaking her shoes, but her heart blazed with heat. Along the ride, she repeated her pitch over and over, rehearsing every number, every point, not allowing herself a single mistake. When they met, the store owner looked her in the eye and asked bluntly, "Why should I trust you?" I've seen startups come and go, disappearing in months." She drew a deep breath. Instead of reciting the script, she told him her story about the ridicule, the tiny but determined team, the dream of creating something that truly changed people's daily lives. He fell silent, then slowly nodded. "All right. I'll give your product a try in a few of my stores. If it sells, we'll talk again." One sentence, but to her, it was a beam of light in the tunnel. She walked back to the office, smiling and crying at the same time. When her two teammates saw her walk in, soaked from the rain but with eyes burning bright, they jumped to their feet. "We got the contract," she shouted. They all embraced, laughter filling the cramped little room, drowning out the rain outside. That night, they didn't eat instant noodles. They pooled their last coins to buy one big pizza, eating, laughing, and dreaming of brighter days ahead. It was just a small contract, but for them, it was a door cracked open to an entirely new horizon. That night, after their humble pizza celebration, the three of them leaned against the peeling walls, gazing up at the cracked ceiling, but in their hearts, it felt like they were sitting in a grand ballroom. No wine, no chandeliers, but something far more precious: hope. She looked at her two partners. Their eyes were bloodshot from exhaustion, yet glowing with newfound belief. All the rejections, the headshakes, the mocking laughter, it all seemed to vanish in the light of one simple nod from that store owner. "You know what?" she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "We're no longer just three dreamers crammed in this tiny room. From today, we're a real company, and one day, the world will have no choice but to see us." It wasn't just encouragement. It was a declaration of war against everyone who had ever dismissed them. The next day, the team worked with a new kind of energy. Shaky hands turned steady. Every line of code, every design tweak, every phone call carried the belief, "We have a chance." When their products were finally placed in the suburban stores, they went to see them on the shelves. They snapped photos, even lingered in the corner, watching nervously to see if anyone would pick one up. And when a single customer reached out, grabbed their product, and dropped it into a basket, the three of them nearly screamed with joy. It was just one customer, one package, but to them, it felt like $1 million contract. That night, back in her room, she opened her old notebook, flipping to the page where she had written her vow. Beneath the words, "One day I will return," she added, "Today we have begun. The fire is lit, and it will never go out." The light in that tiny room burned late into the night, but this time it didn't shine on tears of despair. It illuminated three people smiling in belief. The small success from the suburban stores was like a sip of water in the desert, enough to ease the thirst, but not enough to build an empire. The team was still drowning in unpaid bills, rent deadlines looming over their heads. They had belief, yes, but the path ahead remained foggy. Then one day, as she was handing out flyers outside a shopping mall, that fragile hope suddenly sprouted wings. Amid the bustling crowd, a familiar voice called out from behind, "Is that you? It is you." She turned around. Standing there was a tall, lean man with bright eyes and a warm smile. It was her former economics professor, the very first person who once told her, "You see things differently. Don't let anyone extinguish that." They sat down at a nearby cafe. She poured out her journey, the humiliations, the tears behind boardroom doors, the fragile beginnings. He listened quietly, nodding, smiling faintly, never interrupting. Finally, he said, "You know, I left teaching to start my own venture, and I need a partner with vision. You still have that look in your eyes, the one I trusted years ago. Let's work together." She froze. A part of her wanted to say no immediately, afraid of being used again. But his sincerity calmed her heart. After many sleepless nights, she decided to take the leap. Her technology, his market experience, a small alliance. Together, they began developing a new pilot product, this time aimed at a niche market no one else seemed to notice. And that tiny step opened the door to something far bigger, an opportunity she had never dared to dream of. That night, after signing the partnership, she wrote in her old notebook, "First ally. The fire is growing." The new alliance gave her something she hadn't felt in a long time. She was no longer alone in the fight. Her former professor brought experience, connections, and the calm of someone seasoned by life. She brought creativity, grit, and an unshakable belief. After countless late-night sessions in their tiny office, they agreed on a bold move: target the niche market. Not the glamorous cities, but small towns, places overlooked by the giants, where people rarely had access to quality products. Everyone thinks there's no money there. No opportunity, she said, pointing at the map pinned on the wall. But that's exactly why we should be first. When they need us, they'll remember us. They split the roles. Her team focused on tech and product, while her mentor approached and persuaded local distributors. It was grueling. Long bus rides, quick meals at gas stations, nights spent in cheap motels. But everywhere they went, they were greeted with warm smiles and firm handshakes. And then came the surprise. The very product mocked as naive by investors was embraced by the small-town communities. They didn't care about the sneers of boardrooms. They cared only whether the product improved their daily lives. One morning, while visiting a small shop, she stood frozen as a group of customers scrambled for the last boxes on the shelf. The store owner laughed heartily. "You better send me more soon. Your stuff's outselling those big brands already." Her heart raced. In that moment, she knew they had struck gold. This was the path back, not just to survive, but to conquer. Within weeks, the quiet small towns turned into scenes of something extraordinary. Her product was flying off the shelves the moment it appeared. People whispered to each other about the new thing, reliable, convenient, and affordable. At first, only a handful of shops carried it. But soon, store owners were calling each other, spreading the word. One morning, when she opened her battered laptop, her inbox was flooded. "We need a restock. Immediately. When can you expand distribution to my area? Can we secure exclusivity for our chain?" The team stared at each other, torn between joy and panic. The young programmer shouted, "We're doomed! If this keeps up, we'll never keep up with production." The marketing girl burst into tears, but for once they were tears of joy. For the first time, people are demanding our product. We're not begging them, they're begging us. She sat still for a moment, her heart racing. The sleepless nights, the hidden tears, the humiliations in that boardroom, they all dissolved into smoke. In their place, she felt like she was sitting atop a firework, ready to explode. That night, the three of them didn't eat instant noodles. They ordered the biggest pizza they could afford, grabbed a few cheap beers, and laughed until their stomachs hurt. Amid the laughter, she opened her old notebook and wrote in bold letters, "The customers are coming. The game has begun." Within just a few months, the tiny company once mocked as a joke was making headlines in local newspapers. At first, it was just short blurbs, new product gaining traction in small towns. But the numbers were undeniable. Revenue doubled in the first quarter. Shelves constantly empty, customers lining up. A young journalist visited their tiny office. He blinked in surprise. No skyscraper headquarters, no sleek reception, just a shabby room with plastic chairs. Yet there he heard stories soaked in sweat, tears, and relentless belief. The article went live under the headline, "From Laughed At to Market Phenomenon, The Journey of a Black Woman CEO." The piece spread quickly. Bigger outlets picked it up, not to flatter her, but because the truth was impossible to ignore. The market was buzzing with her name. Customers praised, competitors grew wary, and investors, the very ones who once sneered, were now whispering about her at cocktail parties. She sat staring at the article glowing on her old laptop screen, her hand trembling. Her heart swelled. Years ago, in that cold boardroom, they told her, "You don't belong here." But now, the headlines said otherwise. She belongs, and she's taking over. That night, she opened her notebook and wrote, "They're starting to remember my name. This is only the beginning." The unexpected success of her tiny company spread faster than gossip in the financial world. Within months, her product had conquered small towns, slipped into cities, and become a staple in household shopping carts. One morning, while reviewing orders with her team, she received a strange email. The subject line read simply, "We need to talk." The sender, the chief strategy officer of a multinational giant, one of the very investors who had once laughed her out of that boardroom. The office went silent. The young programmer muttered, "God, if they're emailing us, it means they're scared." She opened it. The words were polite, yet dripping with arrogance. "We are impressed by your company's rapid growth. However, this market has always belonged to us. Consider collaboration, or at least avoid creating unnecessary competition." She chuckled. A half smile, equal parts bitter and triumphant. Once, they hadn't even glanced at her plan, treating her as a joke. Now they were the ones reaching out with an invitation. But it didn't stop there. Weeks later, the giants unleashed massive discounts, aggressive promotions, and flashy marketing campaigns to crush her. Some small shops were even threatened. "If you keep selling her products, we'll cut ties with you." She realized. The game had entered a new phase. This wasn't boardroom laughter anymore. This was war, a battle between a scrappy underdog and a bloodthirsty giant. That night, she sat in her office, the lamp casting golden light across her determined face. She opened her notebook and wrote, "They've made their move. Now it's my turn." The first strike was just flashy marketing campaigns, but soon the attacks grew vicious. Anonymous posts spread across social media, claiming her product was low quality, unsafe, even a cheap knockoff of bigger brands. She read each cruel comment with a tightening chest. Some worried customers emailed her, "Is it true your product isn't safe, like the papers say?" Who should we believe? It didn't stop there. The giants whispered rumors in investor circles. "That company is just a bubble, ready to pop any day now." Distributors who had been ready to sign suddenly backed away, terrified of being dragged into trouble. One morning, at a shop she often visited, the owner pulled her aside with an apologetic look. "Miss, I believe in you, but they threatened me. If I keep selling your product, they'll cut off all my other supply contracts." "I'm sorry. I can't fight them." She nodded silently and stepped outside. The sky was gray, drizzle falling, bitter cold sinking into her bones. Those who once dismissed her now feared her, and to protect their throne, they were ready to crush anyone. Back in the office, the tension was thick. The young programmer slammed the desk. "They're playing dirty. How can we fight against billions of dollars?" The marketing girl bit her lip, voice shaking. "If this keeps up, we'll lose every customer we've gained." She listened. Let the silence stretch, then finally spoke. "The harder they hit, the clearer it is we're a threat. If they truly thought we were nothing, they wouldn't waste their time. They're afraid, and that fear means we're winning. So we'll fight back, not with lies, but with products and customers." Her eyes blazed, her voice sharp as a blade cutting through the rain outside. Once again, she opened her notebook and wrote a single line. "They chose war. I choose victory." The following days were filled with tension. The office phone rang non-stop, mostly cancellations. Orders dropped. Morale sunk. She knew if this went on, they wouldn't just lose customers. They'd lose the faith of the very team standing beside her. Instead of breaking down, she gathered everyone. The room was so quiet they could hear the rain tapping on the tin roof. She placed her old notebook on the table, looked each person in the eye, and said, "Yes, they have money. Yes, they have power, but what they don't have is the hearts of the customers. And that's where we win." The marketing girl frowned, voice uncertain. "But how?" "They're smearing us everywhere. Even if the product works, who will believe us?" For the first time in days, she smiled. "Then we won't argue. We'll let our customers speak for us." So they launched a campaign called Real People. Real stories. No flashy ads, no celebrity endorsements, just the raw voices of their actual users, homemakers, workers, everyday people. They filmed short clips. A young mother said, "This product saves me time every single day." A small shop owner laughed. "My customers ask when the next shipment is coming, not when they can return it." The videos were simple, but they spread like wildfire. First a few hundred views, then thousands, then tens of thousands. More and more people realized this wasn't hype built by investors or media. It was real, chosen by the people themselves. The press took notice. A local TV channel ran a feature interviewing customers and showing lines of people waiting to buy. She watched the broadcast, eyes wet with emotion. This was no longer just a tiny company against a giant. This was a community rising up to defend the truth. In her notebook, she wrote, "The customers have spoken. We are no longer alone." The raw customer videos spread faster than any million-dollar campaign. People no longer saw her company as a pitiful underdog, but as living proof that you could stand tall against giants. A major newspaper published a full-length article with a bold headline, "Small Startup Fights Billion-Dollar Titan and Stays Standing." Social media exploded, hashtags of her company name trending. People began calling her by titles filled with pride and inspiration. The Black Startup Warrior. The woman who refuses to fall. Even more astonishing, shops that had once backed away in fear now returned, eager to carry her products. "The customer demand is too high. I can't ignore it anymore," one shop owner admitted on the phone. In their tiny office, the air buzzed with energy. The team worked non-stop, but not from despair, this time from exhilaration. They knew. They had gone from dismissed to defended. One evening, she walked through a busy street and overheard two strangers talking. One pointed to the product in his hand and said, "This is the new brand everyone in my town is using. I heard the woman behind it was once laughed at by the rich. So, who's laughing now?" She chuckled softly. Her shoulders felt lighter, as if a burden had finally lifted. All the pain, all the humiliation once etched in her heart had transformed into pride. That night, she opened her worn notebook once again and wrote, her hand trembling with emotion, "We've become a symbol. Not just for me, but for everyone who was ever told, 'You don't belong here.'" After months of surviving storms, her company entered a new era. Orders no longer trickled in, they poured like a flood. On the computer screen, the revenue chart shot upward, red bars blazing like fire. In one meeting, the marketing girl exclaimed, "We just hit last year's total sales." In only 3 months, cheers erupted across the cramped office. The young programmer, once the constant complainer, leapt out of his chair, laughing and shouting, "Guess we don't have to worry about paying for internet anymore." Everyone burst out laughing. It wasn't just joy, it was release after so many days of almost breaking. Word spread through the startup world. They called it the comeback phenomenon, a fresh wind tearing down old rules. Headlines read, "A black woman CEO is shaking the market with her product." More importantly, her inbox now overflowed with emails from the very investors who once dismissed her. "We'd like to discuss a strategic investment. Your company has potential to become the next rising star. Let's partner." She read them and simply smiled. The echoes of their past rejection were still sharp in her memory. Now they stood in line, begging for a chance. One evening, after everyone had gone home, she sat alone in the office. The neon light glowed over the old wooden desk, stacked high with new contracts. She let out a long sigh, not of exhaustion, but of triumph. The sigh of someone who knew she had survived the hardest climb and now stood on the slope of a glorious peak. In her notebook, she wrote, "Revenue has exploded. The empire begins." With revenue soaring, she knew the company couldn't stay confined to small towns or even just her own country. It was time to go global. In a team meeting, she spread a world map across the table. Her finger traced over regions. "We'll start with emerging markets, places that need practical solutions, not flashy promises. Then we move into Europe, into America." The team was excited but nervous too. The young programmer muttered, "But we're just a tiny startup. How can we possibly compete with international giants?" Her smile was sharp, her eyes fierce. "We don't compete on their terms. We create our own path. They have money and brands. But we have truth, loyal customers, and a story the world will want to hear." And so began their global journey. She and her partners boarded planes, traveling to trade fairs in Singapore, Dubai, and Berlin. At every stop, they carried not just their product, but the spirit of those once rejected, yet unbroken. To their surprise, the response overseas was even more enthusiastic. Small businesses approached, contracts were signed. An international magazine ran a feature on her with the headline, "Black Woman CEO. From Rejection to Global Disruption." The day that article was published, the office erupted. They were no longer an obscure startup. They were now a name recognized on the global business map. That night, in her hotel room abroad, she opened her notebook and wrote, "We have stepped onto the world stage, and the world is listening." As her company's name echoed across international trade fairs, in the glittering cocktail parties of investors, one name kept surfacing in hushed conversations, hers. Those who once laughed at her pitch now sat in closed boardrooms, voices low with unease. "Have you seen their growth charts? At this rate, our market share will be shredded." One man chuckled, but it was strained. "Just luck. How long can a startup survive?" But no one believed that anymore. The numbers spoke too loudly. Revenue doubled, global expansion, international press coverage. Luck couldn't explain a rise like this. Meanwhile, she calmly watched it all. Investor emails piled up. The very people who once dismissed her now wrote sugary lines. "We deeply regret passing on you before. Please let us be part of your journey." She only smiled, saving them all in a special folder labeled, "Make them wait." One evening, she was invited to speak at an international business conference. Under the spotlight, she stood tall, telling her story, from a cramped little office to a global brand. In the audience, among the polished seats, she spotted familiar faces, the ones who once mocked her. Now they sat silent, no laughter left. In that moment she knew the board had turned. The outsider now held the pieces. That night, in her old notebook, she wrote, "They've begun to fear me. And this is only the warm-up." That day, in a lavish conference room downtown, she sat at the head of the table. Before her were the very investors who once dismissed her, now dressed sharp. Faces tense, their words dripping with flattery. Among them was the silver-haired man, the one who had once sneered, "You don't belong here." Now, he smiled warmly, his voice syrupy. "We've reviewed your growth carefully. Your company has potential far beyond expectations. We're prepared to invest significant capital for a fair share of equity. This is a chance to grow together." She stared at him silently, eyes blazing cold. In her mind, replayed the scene years ago, the chuckles, the disdain, the curt shake of the head. And now, here he was, saying the opposite. The room held its breath, waiting. Then she smiled faintly, leaned back, and spoke slowly. "You once told me I didn't belong here. But today, I sit at the head, and you sit before me, begging for a chance. I'm sorry, but today I choose to say no." A ripple of whispers spread, faces flushed with shame. She stood, gathered her papers, and walked out. Behind the door, her heart pounded, not with fear, but with the sweetness of true power, the power to reject. That night, in her battered notebook, she wrote, "Today, I said no, and it was the sweetest word I've ever spoken." Just months after the meeting where she had said a firm no, the financial markets shook. An unexpected crisis erupted. Inflation soared, operating costs skyrocketed, and companies once thought untouchable began to stumble. Among the hardest hit were the very firms that had once rejected her. Revenues plummeted, headlines screamed, major investors facing imminent collapse. Stocks nosedived. Employees panicked, shareholders fumed. One afternoon, as she worked in her sunlit office, the phone rang. The caller was the assistant of that same silver-haired executive. His voice stammered, shaky. "Hello? Madam CEO, my boss urgently wishes to meet with you. We need your help." She paused, eyes glinting with restrained irony. "Help? The same men who once told me I didn't belong. Now beg for my hand?" And it wasn't just one call. Emails poured in, invitations to meetings, partnership offers, even cleverly worded apologies, all from the same names that had humiliated her in that cold boardroom years ago. She closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair. The office was silent, but her heart roared. Part of her wanted to laugh out loud. Another part wanted to cry. History had turned upside down. She picked up her old notebook and wrote a trembling line. "They are on their knees. And I haven't even lifted a finger." The five-star hotel in the city center glittered with lights. The conference room was grand, with high ceilings and crystal chandeliers. Yet inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. The once proud men in expensive suits now looked hollow-eyed, sleepless, and desperate. She entered, her heels striking the floor in sharp echoes. All eyes turned to her, not with disdain this time, but with a mix of fear and fragile hope. The first to rise was the silver-haired executive. His face, now etched with lines, was a far cry from the arrogant man who once told her, "You don't belong here." He bowed slightly, his voice trembling. We were wrong. We need you. Our company is collapsing. If you agree to acquire us, thousands of jobs can be saved." The silence was absolute, as if the entire room awaited judgment. But the judge here was the woman they had once mocked. She pulled out a chair slowly, letting her gaze sweep across the room. Every face, every smirk from years ago flashed in her memory. She smiled, not with gloating, but with the calm of someone holding all the cards. "Interesting. Once you told me I had no place in this world. Now you're asking me to give you a place to survive." A few men dropped their eyes. One bit his lip until it bled. She leaned forward, her voice cutting sharp. "I haven't decided yet. But if I do buy you, the rules will be mine. And this time, you'll be the ones listening." No one dared to protest. Their eyes were hollow with helplessness. That night, back at her office, she opened her notebook and wrote, "They begged. And for the first time, I sat in God's chair." The next day, her boardroom was packed. No longer a cramped startup office, it now gleamed with polished wood and bright lights. In front of her sat the men who once held all the power, now humbled, waiting for her terms. She flipped open her old notebook, stopping at the page that read, "One day I will return." Then she looked up, her gaze sharp as a blade. "You want me to save you? Fine, but the rules will be mine." The air froze. One man cleared his throat nervously. "What? What do you want?" She pronounced each word clearly. "First, every member of your current board must resign. Second, your company becomes a subsidiary under my control. Third, every employee who mocked or blocked me either issue a public apology or walk out." The room erupted. "This is outrageous. We are prestigious corporations. How can we bow like that?" She leaned back, smiling coldly. "Bow or don't, the choice is yours. But don't forget, today, you are the ones begging. And I am the one naming the price." Silence stretched. Beads of sweat trickled down foreheads. They knew if they refused, their companies would collapse. Finally, the silver-haired executive croaked, "Fine, we accept." She nodded slightly, closing her notebook. A wave of fierce satisfaction rose within her, not born of greed, but of justice. Once they laughed. Today they bowed, she wrote on a fresh page. On signing day, the grand boardroom glowed with light. Thick contracts sat neatly on the table. Expensive fountain pens were laid out, yet the air was heavy, thick enough to cut with a knife. She entered. Walking tall, her black blazer sharp, heels striking the polished floor with echoes that reminded everyone. The once dismissed underdog now ran the room. Across the table, the powerful men of yesterday sat in silence. No smirks, no disdainful stares, only bitterness and reluctant surrender. The silver-haired executive's hand trembled as he picked up the pen and signed. The scratch of ink across paper sounded like surrender. One by one, the others followed, none daring to meet her eyes. Finally, she lifted her pen, paused for a heartbeat, then drew a bold signature. The stroke thundered in the silence. In that instant, the balance of power shifted forever. Those who once rejected her were now subsidiaries under her command. She rose, gathered the contracts, and spoke with a cool smile. "From today, the game changes. The rules are mine, and you will learn to obey." No one answered. They only bowed their heads. That night, in her private office, she opened her old notebook. On a fresh page, she wrote in bold, "The day I turned rejection into submission. Justice never tasted sweeter." After that historic signing, her company entered an entirely new era. Major newspapers screamed headlines, "Black woman CEO acquires the giants, the once rejectors now bow." At financial conferences, her name was spoken with respect and curiosity. The investors who once laughed were now lining up. desperate to join the empire she was building. From her new headquarters, a gleaming glass tower in the financial district, she stepped out onto the balcony, gazing down at the bustling city. The wind lifted her hair, the city lights glittering like the world itself was within her grasp. Revenue skyrocketed tenfold in just a year. Branches opened across Asia, Europe, and America. On TV, her product ads flooded the airwaves, not just in small towns anymore, but in luxury supermarkets, flagship stores, even international airports. Her team now numbered in the thousands, but she still made time to visit the tiny old tech room, the one with the plastic chair, the second-hand desk, and memories of nights fueled by instant noodles. Each time she walked in, she smiled softly. From a room the size of my hand to an empire, yet she didn't grow complacent. She knew enemies still lurked, waiting for her misstep. But this time, the scales of power were tipped firmly in her favor. That night, she opened her battered notebook and wrote, "The golden era has begun." But this is not the destination. This is only the first step toward true power. As her name shone brighter, the shadows thickened. The higher she rose, the more jealousy circled her. Anonymous articles popped up in the media, claiming her success was just luck or manufactured by PR. Old rivals and new enemies formed quiet alliances, hiring consultants, lawyers, even dirty players to tarnish her name. One late night in the boardroom, her assistant handed her a thick folder. Inside, a list of upcoming lawsuits, baseless accusations, and entire campaigns of disinformation aimed directly at her. "CEO, they're going after our credibility," the assistant said nervously. She flipped through the pages, her eyes steady. Then a faint, sharp smile curved her lips. Jealousy is proof we've touched real power. But she knew this was no longer a simple startup versus corporation fight. This was now about politics, media, influence. One misstep could shake the empire. In an emergency meeting, she addressed her team. "We won't just defend. We'll go on the offense. If they spread lies, we'll drag the truth into the light. If they sue, we'll turn the courtroom into a stage to tell our story. And if they want war, then they'll see we never retreat." The room was tight with tension, but then one by one, eyes lit with determination. They had walked through hell to get here. No force would make them bow again. That night, alone in her office, she opened her notebook and wrote one short line. "Their envy means I've risen above. But the real game has only just begun." Rumors exploded like a storm. On social media, thousands of comments poured in every hour. Some called her a fraud. Others dismissed her company as a gimmick. Rivals poured money into troll armies, turning every post about her into a battlefield. At first, her team panicked. A young manager nearly broke down. "CEO, if we stay silent, they'll think it's true. But if we respond, we'll fall right into their trap." She calmly sat down, pulled up the big screen, and played the customer videos. A smiling mother, a worker expressing gratitude, a small shop overwhelmed with orders. "This," she said, voice low but commanding, "is the truth. Let the customers speak for us, as they always have." So the company launched a campaign called Truth from Real People. No polish, no PR gimmicks, just thousands of customers speaking out. They shared videos, posted photos, wrote comments defending the brand. Then the miracle happened. Public opinion shifted. Negative hashtags drowned under a tidal wave of positive ones. We trust. Her real products, real people, international outlets picked up the story, reporting that a Black woman CEO has turned a media smear campaign into proof of community power. In a live interview, a reporter asked, "What do you think about being so viciously smeared?" She smiled, her eyes blazing into the camera. "They can buy headlines, but they cannot buy the hearts of customers. And as long as the customers stand with me, no one can bring us down." The audience erupted in applause. That line spread everywhere, becoming a classic quote. That night, she wrote in her notebook, "They threw mud, I turned it into gold. This game, I own it." The Truth from Real People campaign didn't just save the company, it turned her into a global icon. Major outlets ran headlines. Black woman CEO turns crisis into catalyst, with a community at her back. Sales didn't just recover, they skyrocketed. People bought the products not only for their quality, but to be part of her story. Social media flooded with customers posting selfies holding her product. Tagged Nosha We Trust, her a prestigious magazine, put her on its cover with the headline, "The Woman Who Changed the Rules." At an international summit in New York, she was invited to speak. The hall was packed, business leaders, politicians, powerful investors hanging on every word. When she recounted her journey from a cramped room with instant noodles to standing here before thousands, the audience rose to its feet in thunderous applause. A reporter asked, "What do you think brought you here in such a ruthless world?" She smiled and answered slowly, "They once laughed at me. Now they applaud me. The reason is simple. I never gave up." The applause lasted so long, the hall itself seemed to shake. That night, in her New York hotel, she opened her old notebook. Under the warm glow of a lamp, she wrote, "They once called me a joke. Today they call me a legend." After her triumphant victory in New York, the world's eyes were on her. The biggest corporations no longer came to fight, but to offer alliances. International investment funds rolled out the red carpet, ready to pour billions to turn her company into a multinational giant. In a closed meeting, her financial advisor laid out the expansion plan. "If you sign, within 2 years, this company will become a global conglomerate, present in over 50 countries. Revenues could exceed 100 billion. The room was silent. The numbers were staggering, enough to dazzle any business leader. Yet inside her a question gnawed. If we become a giant, will we still be ourselves? Will the fire that once lit that tiny office be smothered by this machine? That night, she sat alone in her skyscraper office. Outside, the city blazed with lights, but inside, her heart wrestled with shadows. On her desk lay her battered notebook, open. She flipped back to the earliest pages, scrawled lines from when the company was nothing more than a dream in a cramped room. "We didn't start this company to get rich. We started it to make change." The words blurred through her tears. Between 2 roads, glory or soul, she knew she must choose. On a fresh page, she wrote, "The crossroads has come. Power or soul, the choice is mine." That day's leadership meeting was unlike any before. No relieved laughter over sales figures. No celebratory applause. The air was thick, as if a storm were brewing. The first to speak was the marketing girl, her voice blazing with passion. "CEO, we have to sign. This is our chance to take the brand global. If we refuse, someone else will seize it." The young programmer slammed the table in protest. "No, we didn't build this company to become another greedy monster like them. We survived because we were different, because we kept our soul. Lose that, and we're nothing but an empty shell." The room erupted. Some sided with expansion, others with preservation. Voices clashed, sharp, desperate, emotional. She sat still, listening. Every argument, every fear, every dream. In her teammates' eyes, she saw unshakable faith, but also the terror of losing what they had fought to protect. Finally, she rose and raised her hand. The room fell silent. Her voice was calm, but carried a weight no one could ignore. "You're right. Both sides are right. We want to go global, but we cannot lose our soul. We want power, but we cannot betray the dream we started with." A hush spread across the room. Eyes locked on her, waiting for the verdict. But instead of deciding, she smiled faintly. "Before I choose, I want to hear one more voice. Not from the giants, not from the investors, but from the people who stood with us from day one." Everyone understood instantly. She would return to the customers, the very ones who had carried them through their darkest days. That night, in her notebook she wrote, "Power or soul, the answer isn't in the boardroom. It lies out there in the hearts of those who believed in us." She left the gleaming glass tower, leaving behind whispers of billions and global expansion. On the ride back to the suburbs, the passing streets pulled her into memories of knocking on doors, begging for one small chance. Her stop wasn't a grand conference, but a small convenience store, her very first customer. The owner had aged, but his warm smile hadn't. "My God, I can't believe you came back," he chuckled, handing her a cup of hot tea. "Your company is famous everywhere now. Why still remember us?" She sat down, eyes full of sincerity. Because it's thanks to people like you that I got this far. Now I'm at a crossroads, and I want to hear from those who believed in me first. The shopkeeper paused, then said softly, "Girl, I bought your product back then not because it was perfect, but because I saw you never gave up. If your company grows so big that it loses that spirit, what's left for customers like us to trust?" The words pierced her heart. She visited more customers, a young mother, a factory worker, a student. All said the same thing. They loved the product, but what kept them loyal was her story. They didn't want her company to turn into another soulless giant. As the sun set, she stood on a quiet street, hearing children's laughter, seeing her product in the hands of ordinary people. Her chest swelled with emotion. That night, in a modest hotel, she opened her notebook. Under the warm lamplight, she wrote, "Customers don't need me to be the biggest. They need me to keep my promise, and that is true power." That day, the headquarters boardroom was packed. Every executive, advisor, and investor was present. All held their breath. On the table lay the thick contract for global expansion, worth billions. She entered, eyes steady. No hesitation now. In her hand wasn't a pen, but her battered old notebook. The room fell silent as she began. "I've heard you. I've heard the numbers. And most importantly, I've heard the people who first believed in us. Our customers don't need a soulless giant. They need a company that keeps its promise. That is why we exist." She placed the notebook on the table and pushed the contract aside. Her voice rang clear, decisive. "We will expand, but not at any cost. We'll grow sustainably, preserving our soul, preserving our spirit. This empire is not about buying power. It's about proving that someone once rejected can still change the world." For a moment, silence hung. Then the room erupted in applause, not for money, but for truth. They knew they were following a leader unlike any other. She lifted her chin and smiled. "They once rejected me. Now they beg me to buy them. But the greatest power I have today is the power to choose my own path." That night, she wrote the final line in her notebook. "I have chosen." And this time it wasn't power that chose me, it was me choosing power with a soul.